My name is Josh, I own a gym, and for the last decade plus, I've spent over 30 hours of every week on the floor training clients and members. And today's question that I'm going to answer is, what is the difference between anaerobic and aerobic exercise? We got this question this morning in the gym, so we're going to address it and just kind of break down the basics, the basic differences between the two of them, and then talk about how that applies to an actual training program. The main difference between aerobic and anaerobic exercise is that aerobic exercise needs oxygen. The reactions that develop energy, the energy systems that are qualified as aerobic, need oxygen to function. Anaerobic exercise does not require the presence of oxygen to work. This creates sort of two different, essentially, energy systems, a little bit like a hybrid vehicle. Anaerobic exercise, those energy systems, they're very good at developing a lot of energy very fast. The quickness of the energy development is what allows you to do really high intensity things like weightlifting or sprinting. Aerobic exercise has a much greater potential for energy development, but it's much more slow. It's a slower process. So you cannot use as much intensity. And here are some exercise examples. Aerobic examples would be like running a marathon or even running a 5K. Other things that are aerobic include resting, sleeping, resting between sets when you're doing strength training. Most of your life is spent in a more aerobic energy system. Anaerobic examples of that would be like sprinting or strength training. These are higher intensity. You can't sustain them forever because the potential of energy development is lower with the anaerobic. They're two slightly different systems. You don't spend much time in the anaerobic system unless you're doing sprints or strength training or something that is high intensity but short. Again, you spend most of your life in the aerobic system. I like to think of them like a water park. If your body was a water park, the anaerobic system is like a slide. You slide down for 30 seconds or however long it takes, and then your rest period is you walking back up the stairs to the top of the slide. Your aerobic system is more like a lazy river. We're relying on our cardiovascular system because we need oxygen for the exercise. We're relying on our cardiovascular system to flow constantly the way that a lazy river does. Now, because the two systems are a little bit different, the benefits of the two systems are a little bit different. You should probably be including, and by probably I mean almost definitely, be including both types of exercise in your routine. Strength training, sprinting, maybe to a little bit of a lesser extent, but definitely strength training helps, of course, build strength, build muscle, maintain muscle tissue, build bone strength. You are, of course, going to use some glucose. You're going to use those energy substrates, which is good for our body, and improve and retain your flexibility. Strength training is one of the best ways to improve and retain flexibility and mobility at joints because you're going to, when you use a more full range of motion in your strength training movements, you're going to be able to retain the ability to hit those ranges of motion. So everything from strength, muscle, connective tissue, all this stuff is improved with anaerobic exercise. Aerobic exercise, we're primarily concerned with the efficiency of energy development through the cardiovascular system. Again, because we need oxygen, so we need the cardiovascular system to constantly be flowing pushing new blood throughout the body so that we're getting oxygen to our tissues. This is very important, especially for long-term health, but also as it relates to that anaerobic exercise. When your cardiovascular system is more efficient, you won't have to rest as long between your anaerobic strength work, your sets or your sprints, because your aerobic system will be able to push more recovery essentially into the same amount of time. The other thing with cardiovascular health is that when your cardiovascular system is more efficient, it doesn't have to work as hard most of the time when you're resting, when you're just living life, when you're sleeping. The system's not creating as much stress because it's more efficient, so it's just not working as hard. So when it comes to programming, if we're trying to cover both of our bases, I essentially like to think of them as two separate blocks. On the aerobic side, we can cover most of our aerobic bases by doing a little bit of high intensity and lower intensity cardio. Lower intensity cardio for most people, that could be everything from walking to hiking to maybe your zone 2 or zone 3 type of cardio work. If you like to run, you like to row, you like to bike ride, all of these things for most people will probably count. The higher intensity cardio, that could be tempo work. It could be some interval work that's going to push your heart rate a little bit higher. It's still aerobic, but we're working on the higher end of that toward what we call the lactate threshold. On the anaerobic side, for most people, what we want to do is make sure that we're covering our entire body, lower body, upper body, probably using mostly compound movements, progressive overload over time. That's the type of stuff that's going to give us the benefit. If you'd like to include some sprinting in there, essentially, of course, a full body, but mostly a lower body movement, you can include some sprinting in there. I would probably recommend at least 2 days of full body work for most people would be a great place to start when it comes to anaerobic work. And then when it comes to aerobic work, if you're doing a little lower intensity and a little higher intensity, maybe 2 days. Maybe you do some of both in the same session. If you're really strapped for time, maybe you're doing some intervals that are a little higher intensity with some of your anaerobic work. You can split it up a lot of ways, but essentially if I've got these 2 buckets, that's how I like to fill them. A couple days of strength training with a little bit of high and a little bit of low intensity aerobic work, and I think for the most part that will cover your bases. So that's essentially the difference between aerobic and anaerobic exercise. They have slightly different benefits. The systems work in a slightly different way, and it's important that we cover both when we're programming and when we're training.